3. The natural knowledge of God. We must now inquire whether there is an answer to such a question for man, and if so, what kind of certainty we are allowed to attain. In his letter to the Romans, the Apostle Paul found himself confronted precisely with these problems, and he responded with a philosophical reflection based on facts presented by the history of religions. In the megalopolis of Rome, the Babylon of that age, he encountered the type of moral decadence that comes from the total loss of tradition. People were deprived of that interior evidential character that in other times had been offered to man from the outset of his life by usages and customs. Where nothing can be taken for granted, everything becomes possible, and nothing is impossible any longer. Now there is no value capable of sustaining man, and there are no inviolable norms. All that counts is man's ego and the present moment. The traditional religions are merely comfortable facades, without any spirituality. All that remains is a naked and crude cynicism. The apostle offers a surprising response to this metaphysical and moral cynicism of a decadent society, dominated only by the law of the jungle. He declares that, in reality, this society knows God very well. What can be known about God is plain to them. He then backs up this affirmation. Ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, have been clearly perceived in the things that have been made. And Paul draws the conclusion, so they are without excuse. According to the apostle, the truth is accessible to them, but they do not want it, because they refuse the demands that the truth would make on them. In this context, he says that they, by their wickedness, suppress the truth. Man resists the truth that would demand a submission expressed in giving glory and thanks to God. For Paul, the moral decadence of society is nothing more than the logical consequence and the faithful reflection of this radical perversion. When man prefers his own egoism, his pride, and his convenience to the demands made on him by the truth, the only possible outcome is an upside-down existence. Adoration is due to God alone, but what is adored is no longer God. Images, outward appearances, and current opinion have dominion over man. This general alteration extends to every sphere of life. That which is against nature becomes the norm. The man who lives against the truth also lives against nature. His creativity is no longer at the service of the good. He devotes his genius to ever more refined forms of evil. The bonds between man and woman, and between parents and children, are dissolved, so that the very sources from which life springs are blocked up. It is no longer life that reigns, but death. A civilization of death is formed. The description of decadence that Paul sketches here astonishes us modern readers by its contemporary relevance. However, he is not content merely to describe this state of affairs. There were many who did so in his days, and they display a perverse form of moralism that ends in taking pleasure precisely in the negative behavior it condemns. On the contrary, the apostle's analysis leads to a diagnosis, and hence takes the form of a moral appeal. At the origin of all these negative things lies the negation of the truth in favor of what is convenient, or rather, of what is profitable. The starting point in man is a resistance to the evidential character of the Creator that is present in his heart as the sign of a being who looks at him and summons him. Paul is far from regarding atheism, or an agnosticism that is lived out as atheism, as an innocent position. In his eyes, it is always the fruit of a refusal of that knowledge which is in fact offered to man. Man is unwilling to accept the conditions attached to this knowledge. Man is not condemned to remain in uncertainty about God. He can see him if he listens to the voice of God's being and to the voice of his creation and lets himself be guided by this. Paul knows nothing of an atheism governed by purely idealistic motives. What are we to say to this? Clearly, the apostle is playing in this passage on the contradiction between philosophy and religion that existed in antiquity. Greek philosophy had arrived at the knowledge of the one single foundation of the universe, the Spirit, who alone is worthy of the name of God, even if this knowledge existed in contradictory forms and was insufficiently detailed. But the energy that had sustained its critique of religion soon cooled down, and although this critical attitude was in fact an essential element in Greek philosophy, it increasingly turned to the justification of the worship of the gods and of the adoration of state power. It was therefore an obvious fact that the truth was kept a prisoner. In this sense, Paul's diagnosis is well-founded when we bear in mind the historical situation he is addressing. But despite this, can we really say that his affirmations possess a value that goes beyond this specific historical constellation? Certainly, we would need to modify the details. Nevertheless, Paul's words are essentially painting the picture not of some particular historical situation, but of the permanent situation of humanity, of man, vis-à-vis God. The history of religions is coextensive with the history of humanity. As far as we know, there has never been an epoch in which the question of the one who is totally other, the divine, has been alien to man. The knowledge of God has always existed. And everywhere in the history of religions, in various forms, we encounter the significant conflict between the knowledge of the one God and the attraction of other powers that are considered more dangerous or nearer at hand, and therefore more important for man than the God who is distant and mysterious. All of history bears the traces of this strange dilemma between the non-violent, tranquil demands made by the truth on the one hand, and the pressure brought to make profits and the need to have a good relationship with the powers that determine daily life by their interventions on the other hand. Again and again we see the victory of profit over truth, although the signs of the truth and of its own power never disappear completely. Indeed, they continue to live, often in surprising forms, in the very heart of a jungle full of poisonous plants. But is this true even today, in a totally non-religious culture, in a culture of rationality and of the technology it harnesses? I believe that the answer is yes. For even today, the question man poses inevitably goes beyond the sphere of technological rationality. Even today, we do not limit ourselves to the question, "What can I do?" We also ask, "What ought I to do, and who am I?" There are, of course, cosmological evolutionist systems that elevate the non-existence of God to the level of an obvious truth of reason, and claim thereby to demonstrate that the truth is precisely that there is no God. But this type of general theory of knowledge betrays its own methodological character in essential points. The enormous gaps in our knowledge are filled by a series of mythological, theatrical props, with a fictitious rationality that will not deceive anyone. It is an obvious fact that the rational character of the universe cannot be explained rationally on the basis of something irrational. This is why the logos that is at the origin of all things remains more than ever the best hypothesis, although this is, of course, a hypothesis that demands that we give up a position where it is we who are in charge, and that we take the risk of assuming the position of humble listeners. Even in our days, we cannot say that the tranquil, evidential character of God has been eliminated, but we must admit that it has been made more than ever unrecognizable by the violence that power and profit inflict upon us. In this way, the contemporary situation is fundamentally marked by that same tension between opposite tendencies which runs through the whole of history. On the one side, there is the interior opening up of the human soul to God, but on the other side, there is the stronger attraction of our needs and our immediate experiences. Man is the battlefield where these two contend with each other. He is not capable of sloughing off God completely, nor does he have the strength to set out on the journey toward him. On his own, he is not capable of constructing a bridge that could establish a concrete relationship with this God. We can continue to affirm with St. Thomas that unbelief is contrary to nature, but we must at once add that man is not able to clear up wholly the strange chiaroscuro that weighs down the questions concerning the eternal realities. If a genuine relationship is to come into existence, God must take the initiative. It is He who must come to meet man and address him.